Alan, it's a great pleasure to have you on Facing the Canon.
Thanks, John.
And looking forward to hearing a little bit of your journey. Now, you were in the Navy for how many years?
38 by the time I retired, almost exactly to the day.
So why did you join the Navy?
Well, my father, who's recently passed away, sadly, was an engineer, and sometimes in the holidays I would go and help him at his firm where he was a partner. And when it came to the sort of point of my life where I had to decide what I was going to do next, the one thing I knew I didn't want to do was to work in an office. And I think Mum and Dad said to me, Mum's here, by the way, today, so I've got to be absolutely accurate.
Yeah.
So what are you going to do then? And I was a really keen dinghy sailor, and my whole family were certainly Dad and I were really keen dinghy sailors. So I thought something to do with sailing would be really good, and I'd seen one of those Telegraph adverts from Captain Haddock says, "Come and join the Royal Navy as an officer," and so that's what I said to Mum and Dad that I was going to do, and I think their response was, "They'll not have the likes of you," with some justification, I think, at that time. I wasn't the best student.
No. Were you 19 at the time?
I was. Probably 17 and a half, 18
when you
I made that decision. Yeah.
Yes.
And then by the time I joined, I was sort of nearly 19. Yeah.
Yes.
18 and a bit.
And any regrets joining the Navy?
No, none at all. I think it's the sort of thing I would say to anyone today. If you like a active, exciting life with lots of travel, then it's a brilliant job. I think if I had any regrets, it wouldn't be to do with the Navy, it would be to do with being separated from my wife and family.
Yes.
But that's sort of function, I think, of the job.
Now, what was it like when you first joined? You know the movie J.I. Jane?
Yeah.
When you have to go through these first 6 weeks. Was there a gruesome...
It was absolutely like that.
Was
really
it?
Gruesome, yeah. Gruesome is, that's what they design it to be. Lack of sleep, rushing around, marching, polishing shoes, which I know you haven't done this evening very much, John.
Now, I thought I had actually, but I know what
I told you in that
need.
Inspection upstairs that you should have done. No, it's a lot of that.
It's
and
a
lot of ironing your clothes into lockers and just generally breaking you down so that they can build you back up again. But it's really interesting because in recent times I've done some talking on leadership, and I was talking to a group of young worship leaders, and I said to them, well, we're going to do a practical demonstration of leadership, and I took them out for a lesson on drill, marching up and down, because it's really interesting how much it teaches you that, because I've got long legs, you have to march at a pace which fits in with people who are shorter than you. You have to be in time with them. You have to be sensitive to the people that are next to you. And so drill teaches you quite a lot, as it turns out. But anyway, it was lots of sport, and it was outdoors and on the river. And, frankly, I quite liked the early stages.
Oh, you liked it?
Yeah, I did.
You didn't despair and think, what have I done?
I did. I think I recall saying to Mum and Dad, these people are all fantastically good. I'm never going to make it.
Yes.
But I did. It wasn't as if I didn't enjoy it. It's just I thought I wasn't going to be good enough to get through, I think, in the early days. And
obviously you did get through.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
And of course, it was important to me to get through because we might come on and talk about this later, but
yes.
I was engaged to be married, aged 18, and I was planning to get married when I finished at Dartmouth, so I needed a job.
Yes.
So there was a huge incentive for me to to succeed, I think.
And now, when you first joined, Alan, did you have any aspirations as to what you would eventually like to be over the next couple of decades?
My entire focus throughout being at Dartmouth was to qualify.
That was
simply to get out of there. We had quite a few guys who said, I want to be a commander, or I want to be a captain, or I want to be... I never had any I simply wanted to get out of there in one piece and qualify.
So you basically floated to the top?
I I guess so. I guess so. I mean, the story of anyone's rise in the armed forces is a story which is mostly to do with how fortunate you've been to work with some fantastic people, and how fortunate you have been for the mistakes that you've made not to be found out.
Yes.
Or not to kill anybody.
Yes.
Or, not to cause severe damage, that sort of thing.
Were you ever seasick?
Yeah, I was.
Initially?
Yes. Not on sailing boats, not on really small boats, but the first ship I served on after I'd qualified from Dartmouth was HMS Shetland, a fishery protection vessel. And we were in the north of Scotland in January. My honeymoon, you laugh at what the kids... Let me just tell you, our honeymoon, we got married after I finished Dartmouth, 2 days after, on the 23rd of December. And my honeymoon for my new bride was driving in a Wolseley 1660 automatic to Scotland.
Yes.
With all of our worldly goods.
Where did you get married?
In Richmond, in Surrey.
Right, you drove all the way to Scotland?
Yeah, stopping twice on the way because I wanted to show her a good time.
Yeah.
Right. And with all of our worldly goods in one car, all of our wedding presents, everything we owned.
Yes.
And then I went to sea on the 3rd of January, and she had to move into a mariculture on her own.
In Scotland?
In Scotland, where neither of us had been before, and we had no family, a day later. And it was in a snowstorm, and the heating didn't work. So there we are. That was her introduction to
naval
that. And I joined HMS Shetland, and we went off the north coast of Scotland around the Shetland Islands, and I was horribly sick for it seemed like about a month, but it was terrible.
And then, so how do you cope when you're seasick for a month?
Well, you just have to get on with it. I mean, it was one of those moments where I realised that if I didn't get on with it, then you can be invited to leave the service. If you are, incurably seasick. And fortunately, by the grace of God, the ship broke down, as they were wont to do.
Yes.
And so we went in, and I had a respite. And again, by the grace of God, when we went out again, it was a bit calmer, and I was able to cope. And because of that bout of really horrible seasickness, I've never been seasick again.
Oh, since then, that cured it?
Yeah. Well, it was a small boat, and I've been on bigger boats since then, as we'll probably talk about later.
Yes.
They're much bigger.
So over the years, Alan, you've been to many, many different countries.
Yeah.
And you've been around the world?
Yes, on a couple of occasions.
On a couple of occasions. To tell us a little bit about that experience. So to go around the whole world, in how long does that take?
Well, when I was commanding HMS Monmouth, we circumnavigated and we did spend 3 months in the West Indies chasing drug smugglers and things like that. But the whole trip was 11 months.
11 months?
Yeah, 11 months. But we visited a number of places along the way in the Pacific and around the place. I am a travel bore, as you well know. Anywhere there's been a coastline, you can be sure that I've probably been there.
Yes, you have.
Apart from Russia and China.
And obviously you've been in the Navy for a long time, and you were involved in a number of different conflicts. The first occasion you were involved in warfare, was that scary?
I think it's scary beforehand, but not when you're doing it, because you are so immersed in what you're doing professionally. The ships don't run themselves, so you've got a job, you have to focus really carefully on it, and that takes away, I think, a lot of the sort of immediate concerns. I think what we've seen in conflict and continue to see is it's post-conflict that the consequences of stress and the other concerns that really play. Yes. But not while you're doing it.
Not while you're doing it.
Unless
you just get on with it.
Unless I think, and I can't fully answer this, but I've got a really close friend here tonight who was sunk in his ship during the Falklands conflict. I think that's a different level than I ever had to cope with. Yes. When you've got bombs going off, the ship is crippled, and the ship is then subsequently sunk. I think you'd have to ask him about that.
Yes.
But I think that, clearly getting through that is a different order of challenge than I've ever had.
When you were in the Falklands, you were a helicopter pilot.
Yeah, I was actually training during the Falklands. I spent a lot of time during the actual conflict. I spent a lot of time in the Falklands after the conflict, as it turned out, had finished. We didn't know that it had finished at that stage because we expected the Argentinians to come back again. But actually during the fighting element of the conflict, I was learning to fly. And that was a blessing because my son was born in that period as well. So I arrived.
So what happened? What happens with occasions like when your children were born? Were you able to be there?
Some of the time. My second son,
Yes.
Christopher, I missed his birth because I was in the Falklands. In fact, I was coming back.
And you couldn't get leave.
And I couldn't get leave. So I missed that one, but I was there for Nick and for Emily.
Yes.
Lucy I missed because, again, I was away and got back sort of soon after she was born.
Yeah. So when you went away, how many months at a time would you go away?
Normally, it's sort of 4 to 6 months, but there were times I did a 9-month trip on the aircraft carrier, did an 11-month, that was a world deployment, an 11-month trip in Monmouth.
Right, so when you're first told, hey, maybe at that time you're a commander or something, Commander, you're going on an exercise, it's going to be 9 months.
Yeah.
I mean, you obviously have to follow orders.
Yeah.
You can't refuse.
Well, yes, you can't refuse, and it is difficult for family life, but any young commander, as I was, who is invited to go on a world deployment with his brand new frigate and who says, really rather not go,
Yes.
probably isn't in the right job.
No. But then how do you convey that, though, Alan, to your wife?
I think I have the most wonderful wife, as you know.
Yes, so did you say, darling, I want to go and play with boats, and but I'm going to be away for a year?
Well, I think, Sarah and I were at school together.
Yes.
We fell in love at school.
Yeah.
We gave our lives to Christ at similar times, she before me, and I think we both felt that I should be in the Navy. God had called me into the Navy. So we grew up with coping with the separation. I'm not saying it's easy.
No.
It's not easy. It's really difficult. But
And when you were at sea, were you able to call home?
Not in those days. In those days, we had carrier pigeons, I think. That's just about... No, we had HF communications if you wanted to speak at home. And HF communications, a characteristic is that everybody can listen to them. So you're essentially broadcasting on HF back to the UK from a long way away. And almost anybody else who happens to be tuned into that frequency can hear what you're saying.
So you're saying, darling, I love you.
Darling, I love you. I miss you. Yeah, kiss, kiss, kiss.
And they're all listening.
And they're all listening in. Yeah. So it's not ideal.
So did you work out a little codes? One of these codes
I think
that needed cracking?
we soon realised that actually we communicated by letter. Do you remember those things? Piece of paper and pen. You had to number the letters because the mail was to far-flung parts was never reliable, and so you might go into one port and find that you were getting letters from a month ago, or you got letters from saying, "Oh, it's all right. The washing machine is fixed now," and you haven't had the letter which tells of the drama with the washing machine, or that the car was crashed, or that a range of other things had happened. So you number them.
So when you came back, say from a trip that lasted 9 months, did it take a while to adjust when you got home?
I think so. I think there are two things. The first is that when you're at sea, you are so focused on doing it, and the adrenaline keeps you going, and you don't have much sleep, and you're focused on the job. And when you get home, you tend to go through a sort of well-worn cycle. When you first get home, it's fantastic. Oh, I love you, I miss you. Kids are great, missing daddy. And so the first day and a half is brilliant, and then you realise how tired you are. The kids realise it's not good to have dad at home because he tells us to do things that we haven't been told not to do for some time.
Yeah.
And you then have your first argument with the missus, and
so when Sarah said to the kids, "You wait till your dad gets home," and then when's that, in 6 months?
My kids have gone through a lot, but they're wonderful.
Oh,
they're wonderful.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So, for you, as you look back over your life, your career, what are you able to say? What was a highlight for you?
I think recently we've been to the recommissioning or rededication of HMS Monmouth, and that was the first frigate that I commanded.
Yes.
And I think probably for most people who are in, although I was an aviator, I joined the Navy as a seaman officer, so I'm sort of a bit of a hybrid. I joined to drive ships around, really. That's what I wanted to do.
Yes.
So for me, and I love my flying career, but for me, when I first walked up the gangway of my first ship was probably the professional moment of my career, because they have a series of whistles, they call them pipes.
Yes.
Have you seen it on the films? You know,
Yes.
there's always
Yes.
all of that sort of thing. It's probably played havoc with a microphone. But all of that, so you get all of that, and you walk up the gangway, and my predecessor was a wonderful man called Graham Ramsey, and he was at the rededication, and he said, the problem I had, Alan, here I was a senior commander, and he was about 42, 43 when
Yes.
he took command, and he'd done a fantastic job, and I was 34 and a bit, 35, and looked incredibly young. He said he thought that they'd given the ship to a boy.
Yes.
But it was great. That was it. That was my moment.
That was your moment.
Yeah, I commanded aircraft carriers and other things subsequently, but that's the one moment, if I have to choose one.
But you know, even that statement, though, did you feel a little bit, oh boy, you know, I feel young, I've got this great responsibility?
Yeah, I mean, our training is such that we are trained for that moment. You are trained for that moment. As I guess most ballet dancers or sportsmen are, but if you don't get, butterflies in the tummy when you are asked to do something as exciting and challenging as that, then you're probably, again, you're not really ready for it.
No, of course.
I think you have to be.
Yes.
I mean, I'm sure you do some fantastic speaking engagements, but I suspect if you're speaking to 2,000, 3,000, 5,000 people in America, you feel a bit nervous before you go on. And
Yes.
I think anybody that
Yes,
commands
of
a
course.
ship would feel that
Would
way.
feel,
unless they're very fortunate.
Now, you were given the opportunity over the years to do a number of different things. How does that work in the Navy? Do you get asked to do those things, or do you make a hint that, hey, I'd like to do this?
No, I think it's a bit of both.
Bit of both.
You come to a sort of agreement with a man called the appointer, the sort of way that your career is going to go. And a lot of it depends on success on the way. So, if my command of my first ship had been a disaster in some way, then one set of path would be open to you. But if it went well, then another route opens up. And I think it's like that in life, isn't it?
But you had great opportunities, particularly in the last 10 years of your career, to work at the Pentagon, to work at the Foreign Office, to work at all sorts of places, and in intelligence. Now, that whole thing of intelligence, and you think, was it a bit like James Bond?
Well...
Not really.
No.
No.
I thought it was quite interesting because I think in the first year that I was Chief of Defence Intelligence, the Bond movie that year had featured a particular room in MI6's building, which ended up getting blown up in the movie.
Yes.
And as a sort of reward for MI6 allowing them access, they gave a sort of a family's viewing of the Bond film to the agents and to the personnel at the SIS. I think very few of them would have recognised themselves in the movie. But they do have all sorts of gadgets. They do have gadgets. That bit is probably towards accurate. Not the sort of Aston Martin DBSs.
No.
And that sort of thing, but other gadgets.
But other gadgets, yeah. But so, you know, when you look back over your career, you said that you became a follower of Christ in your teenage years.
Yeah.
So you went into the Navy as a committed Christian.
Well, as a very embryonic and young Christian, yes, but absolutely committed. Yeah.
And how was it being a Christian in the Navy? Was that difficult?
I don't think it's difficult being a Christian in the Navy. It's difficult being a Christian on your own.
Yes.
I think there were few ships that I served on that had more than 5 Christians. And the way that our watchkeeping system works, you know, you're asleep when you're not on watch, and so you're not necessarily up at the same time that the other people are. Some ships didn't have any Christians on them at all. And now it's always very difficult to say any Christians on them at all. There are a lot of people, there are different levels of belief that people have. We both know that. But in terms of the sort of committed Christians, people that you could pray with, do a Bible study with, I think there were few. Having said that, I've never been in a situation in the armed forces where people are against you reading your Bible or against you. You know, you don't get, there's no level of attack for your Christian faith. It's just not participation.
Right.
So it's the
is
loneliness.
That because there's an element you just respect everybody?
Yeah.
And don't disrespect people?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So did people know that you were a Christian?
Yes.
Yes.
I think it's impossible not to know on a ship, because a ship, the average warship isn't much longer than this church, if you include the bit out there.
Yes.
And you live in it with 200 plus people. You know, everybody knows everyone's weaknesses, strengths.
Yeah.
How often they wash.
Everything.
Sort of thing.
Yes. So, go on. I mean, obviously, this might be a difficult question to answer because depending on where you were at a particular time and which country, etc. But could you tell us, like, let's say you're out away 9 months, what would be a typical day?
Well, it changes depending on what you're doing.
Of course.
If I was a captain, then a typical day would start in the middle of the night because you get woken up 4 or 5 times a night for various things that people have to report to you, shipping nearby, problems with the ship. And then you have a series
so someone comes into your room, wakes you up?
No, they call you on...
They call you?
They call you on a microphone.
Yeah,
sort of thing.
and you're in your PJs?
And you're in your bed, yes.
Yes.
And then you have to wake up almost instantly and then...
And make a decision.
And then go back to sleep again. You get used to it, I think.
Yeah, so that might happen a few times through the night.
Oh yeah, depending on where you are, probably on average 5 times a night, I would think.
Right, so it's just like waking up for a
if you're
baby,
in the middle
really,
of the
isn't
Pacific,
it?
less, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, absolutely. So you don't have to change any nappies.
No, that's true.
So that's good.
So could you answer the question in your bed?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you didn't have to get up.
You don't have to get up.
No. Okay.
And then you go through administration. Yeah, administration the world over is the same. You know, people with personnel problems, issues. People want to be promoted. Things that you have to do for the ship. You know, ordering money. You know, I once went with the aircraft carrier when I was a junior pilot to Palermo in Sicily.
Yes.
I was the advanced liaison officer and I was invited to sort everything out for the ship. We had a ship's agent there, Mimo Sciotto. He was a wonderful guy.
Yes.
And I remember saying to him, Mimo, I need to get £2 million worth of lira for the ship. So for the ship to buy things and also for the sailors to exchange, so £2 million. But I said, I can't help noticing that Palermo is the capital of mafia country.
Yes.
So how are we going to get 2 million in lira, which was a small truckload of lira in those days, to the ship? And he said, don't worry, Alan. He said, I've I would do it in an Italian accent, but I don't want to embarrass
No.
my Italian friends. Don't worry, Alan, he said, I have got a security company. And I said, security company? What good is a security company in mafia country? He said, this is the mafia security company.
Yeah.
So
don't worry. Don't worry.
Don't worry. So you have to plan those things. You have to get the money to the right place. You have to plan the logistics. You have inspections to do on the ship. A myriad of administrative things. Then you're looking at things like the navigation. Where's the ship going? What are our plans for the next 3 or 4 days? And then you get involved in training the ship's company, because most of the time, for most people, including in Nelson's Navy, is about training. It's train in peace to prepare for war.
Yeah.
And so we are fanatical in the Navy about training. I mean, absolutely fanatical. And so much of the day would be training. And then some of it would be, physical training. I've always loved sport, physical fitness.
Yes.
So, you'd always have a time where you'd either run around the deck or do what we call circuit training around the flight deck and do that sort of rowing.
And would everyone do that?
No, a large number
would do that.
Would do that, yeah, a large number. And then in the evening, if you're the captain, you're on your own most of the time, but you read or...
What, you eat on your own?
Yeah. It's a very sort of solitary life in that respect. But, as I've said to people on many occasions, it's not too solitary, because if you're the captain, nobody can say, go away, we don't want to talk to you.
No.
So I used to go down the engine room sometimes and sit there and have a cup of tea and chew the fat. Amazing what you can find out when you sit in the engine room for an hour.
Yeah, and just talk to people.
Talk to people, yeah, absolutely.
Now, help us to understand about war, Alan. So what would you say to somebody who said that they were a pacifist?
Yeah, I mean, I think you do, if you're a Christian and you join the armed forces, you do have to ask yourself questions about what you're doing. And so my response now is not to say I'm right and Quakers are wrong. It's just the way I feel about what I do and have done for a career. I think there are two things or at least two things. There is, Augustine's just war theory.
Yes.
I'm not going to expound on just war theory tonight. Interestingly, we do study that. It's studied, across the armed forces. The notion of just war is the underpinning of the Geneva Convention and many of the United Nations charters. So part of that is, I think, that war is not murder. Killing in war is not murder. Killing in war is legal. Murder is illegal killing.
Yes.
Now, it's legal providing it passes a number of tests, as it were. Is it approved by Parliament? Is it also approved by the United Nations? Well, that latter bit is not absolutely fundamental.
Yes.
So, what we are doing then is engaged in killing on behalf of the state in defined circumstances. Even in war, people are not allowed to conduct warfare in a way which would be illegal and tantamount to murder. If they do, they're prosecuted. And very sadly, a recent case that people will have probably read about of a Royal Marine sergeant who was prosecuted for murder in Afghanistan for the way that he dealt with an insurgent. So the first thing is, I don't think it's against the commandments, because we are not murdering people, we're killing people. The second thing I think some Christian brothers and sisters say to me is, didn't Jesus say, turn the other cheek? And, if you're struck on one cheek, offer the other. I absolutely believe in personal forgiveness. I think it's fundamental to our Christian faith. But I think there's a world of difference between personal forgiveness and societal forgiveness. I think if you asked most Christians whether they would be happy for a burglar to be caught having burgled their house and to be let off, as it were, let's not bother to have police, the burglars, will just turn the other cheek and they can walk away. Most Christians would say, no, that's entirely wrong. We have police to stop that. So society has a series of rules that people are happy to as it were, follow in police and judiciary, and those people are punished.
So Alan, what do you think Jesus meant when he said turn the other cheek? What does that mean?
I think he meant for our personal forgiveness for the individual is fundamental. So I'll use an example of the Omar bombing.
Yes.
Where I think famously a Christian family said, we forgive the bombers.
Yeah.
We absolutely forgive them. Personally, we forgive them. But they didn't say, but we don't want the police to catch them.
Yeah.
And we don't want them to be punished, as society has decided you should be punished for murder. And I think, what we do in the armed forces is dealing with, on behalf of society, some of the most evil and difficult challenges in the world for people who otherwise cannot help themselves. Would Jesus have wanted women and children to be murdered and raped in Darfur and for us to stand by and do nothing? That's not the God that I know.
No.
But would that God expect us to react disproportionately and to do things which are out of all proportion to the events that are happening in order to save those people? No, he would not.
Yeah.
So it's a question of acting on behalf of society to protect those who can't otherwise protect themselves.
Yes.
In a way which is legal and within some restrictions. And if those would be along the just war line of things.
But have you ever felt that you had to carry out a particular order that made you feel uncomfortable because you were a committed Christian?
It's interesting. I thought I haven't specifically. I think there are some things which I've done which have been awkward because I'm unsure of the value of what we were doing.
Yes.
But I always rest on Romans 13. I think the opening verses of Romans 13 are really clear about how we should honour authority, that God places people in authority over us.
Yes.
Rulers, whether we voted for them or not, they are placed over us.
Yeah.
And our job as Christians, our duty as Christians is to obey those authorities, our rulers.
But
now,
in the last few years... Go on,
just one final thing.
Yes.
None of those rulers ever asked me to deny Christ.
Okay.
None of those rulers ever asked me to bow down to an idol, as Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego were famously asked to do.
Yes.
Were I to be asked to do such a thing, I don't think I could do it.
Yeah.
But we're in the Royal Navy, not in the Chinese Navy.
Yes. Yes. The last couple of years of your career, you were interacting far more with politicians.
Yeah.
Was that more frustrating? Were they talking a different language to your colleagues? Was that totally different?
I mean, it's
naval?
very different because you are dealing with, when you're in a naval environment, you're dealing essentially with fellow experts who are trained, who've been, whose main role it is to be in the Navy. There are very few politicians who have considerable experience of the particular department's, role that they find themselves leading. And so you are necessarily dealing with willing and very keen amateurs a lot of the time. That is not to say they are amateur in their ability, nor in the depth of their thinking. They're amateur in their experience. You can get an extremely professional military man who isn't very clever, who can be very dangerous.
Yes.
You can get an extremely clever politician who isn't very experienced, who can be really good.
Yeah.
And do a lot of good. And many of them, most of them do. And I have the greatest respect for them. Most of them take advice, and they get a lot of extremely good advice from their civil servants, who are much undervalued in the press, and from their military colleagues in defence.
But you know, like with some conflicts, I mean, we're not going to go into specific ones or details, but do you think sometimes we do make wrong decisions about what we end up doing, and then there are huge consequences?
Yeah. So there's a really well-known sort of old saw in the intelligence world about the difference between intelligence and enigma. So, you know, intelligence is about finding out secrets. Secrets are things that are essentially knowable. You know, there are things that somebody you can know that can be found out, but you're trying to keep it a secret. Enigmas are essentially unknowable. You know, they're things that are impossible to find out. The danger with giving advice to politicians and taking decisions in conflict and going to conflict is much is unknowable. I'll give you a sort of a way that I think of this. I know, and it's not a secret to me because I found it out, the number of clothes that Sarah Richards has in her wardrobe. Yeah, I know that because I've seen her buy them. I've opened the wardrobe. I know what she's got there.
But you've counted them.
No, not really, not wholly.
No,
but I know the sort of thing that's there.
You know the sort of thing.
I also know what the season is at the moment. I know what she wears in that season.
Yes.
What I do not know is what she actually will wear tomorrow.
Great analogy.
Sometimes, if she's getting up really early, she'll put her clothes out the night before. Then I'll know. Now, intelligence is a bit like that. Somebody puts their clothes out the night before. I know what their clothes they've got in their locker. I know the sort of thing they do in a particular day. If they get the clothes out the night before, I'll know. We'll have a pretty good idea what they're going to do tomorrow.
Sometimes she surprises you.
Sometimes she surprises me.
Depending on what her mood is.
Correct.
So you're saying...
So the trouble with intelligence and predicting the future is only God knows what the future holds. Only God knows. What we do is we make calculated judgments based on our analysis of past behaviour and of secrets that people are trying to hide from us.
Yes.
All conflict is like that, because as soon as conflict starts, things that you expected people to do, they don't do.
Sure, but you're a Christian,
and it changes.
Alan.
Yeah.
You're a Christian and you consult with God and you seek God.
Yeah.
What about the leaders that make decisions over whether we go to war or not, but don't consult God?
Well, they consult with professional officials who give them advice.
But what if that information is wrong?
Then they take bad decisions. And we can think of a number of conflicts where the information that they were given was misleading or wrong. And I think that is a big challenge for anybody.
Anybody, yeah.
Anyone.
When you went into the Navy, 19, you retired from the Navy when you were 57.
Yeah.
Okay. There's always been conflict in the world for thousands of years.
Yeah.
Do you think it's got worse?
No. Its character has changed, but I don't think it's got worse or better. All killing is essentially evil.
Yes. So is it harder now to combat evil in the world than it was?
No. I think it should be easier. Just we're aware of it. And again, another analogy. I don't believe there are more paedophiles in society today than there were 50 or 100 years ago. I think, thanks to the excellent work of the NSPCC and many others, children are better informed and are prepared to stand up and talk about it. And society, therefore, sees these people for what they are and then prosecutes them. I don't think there are more of them. I just think we're better at recognising it. And I think the same is true of conflict around the world. Previously, we wouldn't have heard or may not have recognised.
But now, these days, Alan, we're battling with cyber stuff and drones, suicide bombings. It just appears to the general public that it's bad, it's getting worse.
It is bad, and the question is whether it's getting worse. Since I've got my old mum here, still awake, are you, Mum? Yeah. Mum grew up in Wembley. Unfortunately, when she was growing up in Wembley, there were people dropping bombs on her head every other night.
Yes.
And many of her generation had that happen to them. And a few years before that, there was significant other conflict as well. There were hundreds of thousands of people dying in those wars. The number of people dying in conflicts today is much less than that, I would say, because the conflict isn't world war at the moment, it's local war. And what we are experiencing, what we experienced in July 7/7 bombings is terrorism, people trying to terrorise us, change our behaviour, put on society a range of different restrictions that will affect us all.
Absolutely.
And which they want to do to harm our society. Our responsibility, I think, is to recognise that that's what they're seeking to do and not allow them to do it.
Yes. How do we respond, Alan, to what's happening in the world today, all these tragic events that are happening?
Well, I think what the Bible would say is you have to respond with love. Working out what love looks like, I think, is an extremely challenging part of your faith. I know one person who you know very well, Canon Andrew White, the vicar of Baghdad, whose response has been exceptionally brave, staying with his flock through thick and thin, murder, kidnapping, and he's still attempting to stay with his flock in Jordan. I know another sister who's spent her whole life working to bring education to poor rural districts of Pakistan at massive risk to her life. I know Tear Fund and other Christian brothers and sisters are working in some of the toughest parts of Africa. You know, I met in Goma, which is eastern Congo, Democratic Republic of Congo, in some of the worst, terrorist fighting. I met Christians working amongst the people there at significant risk to their life. That's what Christians have always done. We should continue to spread a gospel of love in order to combat the difficulties of the world. I can name thousands of others as well who are doing similar types of work.
Over the years, Alan, you've seen a lot. You've been involved in conflict in several different places. You've seen evil, tangible evil. You've seen injustice. Has that affected your own faith? Have you at times doubted the existence of God and his participation in the world?
Not necessarily because of that, I suspect. I mean, the most challenging moment of my faith came, I think, when Sarah and I were about 25, 26. I woke up one morning full of the joys of spring, had a wonderful job, helicopter pilot, fantastic house, beautiful views in Cornwall, 2 wonderful sons, and went to pick up my 5.5-month-old son, and he had died in the night. And now I was, I'm a believer in healing, as you know.
Sure.
I absolutely believe God can heal miraculously. I've seen it happen. And I prayed fervently for my son to be, given his life back. But it was not to be. So that experience, I think, challenged my faith more than any other thing that I've seen subsequently. What did I learn from that? First of all, I think I learned that there was no promotion that I could ever be given in the Royal Navy that would make up for losing my son. So there was no sense that the world could give me anything that would ever be a recompense for that. The second, after you recover from the shock, I think you're left with 2 questions. Either there is no God, or there is a God. What's he trying to do? And the answer to that is God's not responsible for my son dying. God doesn't go around randomly selecting Christians to have their son taken away from them. People that are near to us die because evil is in the world. We are in a fallen world. These things happen. They happen to non-Christians, they happen to Christians. Christianity is not an insurance policy. It doesn't insure us against bad things happening to us. Christianity is about an assurance policy. We have an assurance. I know where my young son's gone. My son's gone to heaven.
Yes.
I know where he's gone. He's not with me, which I regret. So I think that of all of the things that I've seen, and I have seen some evil and horrible things, that was the most challenging thing to my faith. And out of that, it was really interesting because we mutually know a very old now but lovely man, David Richards.
Yes.
And in his biography, his autobiography, he has in the frontispiece the verse which is closest to my heart, Proverbs 3, verse 5. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your path straight. Yeah. And I think that was the verse we hung on to throughout that time. I would also just say that we were surrounded by some wonderful brothers and sisters in Christ, 2 of whom are here today, but 2 in particular, David and Sandra Gilbert, who led a small church that we were part of, were an utter rock for us. Yeah. And of course our family, my mum and dad and Sarah's mum and father, they gave us tremendous support, but mostly it was about hanging on in that time.
Yes.
You hang on.
You hang on.
You hang on. You cannot do other.
We live, don't we, Alan, in this world of miracle and mystery. But as Christians, we do somehow, we believe that God reigns and rules, and ultimately it will all work out for good.
Yes, absolutely.
Even though some things aren't good.
Yeah, and anyone that's had a cursory reading of Revelation and large chunks of the New Testament will recognise that, some pretty difficult things are going to happen in the world in which we live.
Yes.
And as Christians, we need to be prepared for those difficult things.
Absolutely.
And to keep our faith strong when they happen. because they surely will.
They surely will. Now, you've, as a Christian, practicing Christian, you've been involved in church. You've been involved in leadership in church, in your local church as a church warden on the PCC. I was thinking about this, Alan, today. You as a church warden being on the PCC. Not to generalise, but you hear these stories of, you know, a PCC of a church spending the whole evening debating whether they're going to replace the carpet in the creche, and at a cost of £120. I mean, I'm sure you've been in those meetings where there's something similar to that. Have you kind of felt like saying, "Shut up! I commanded battleships. What are you talking about?" No, it just occurred to me.
Yeah.
Did you?
Well, it's very difficult because I've got a number of friends who've sat on the PCC with me in the audience tonight.
Yes.
I am not a patient man.
No.
In that regard, I like people to have a chance to have their say, but I'm not a patient man. So I do find those things difficult. I have to say the first act I ever conducted as church warden of St Andrew's Parish Church was to attend a consistory court, because my predecessor had allowed a baptistry to be built into St Andrews without having a faculty.
Right.
And then he handed over to me, would you believe this? He handed over to me and said, sort of casually, "Oh, there's this court thing that you have to go to."
Yes.
And I got a, sort of proper sort of vicary judge type and jury, and was given a rap over the knuckles for the outrageous nature of building a baptistry, which, by the way, if you go to St Andrews, you can't see because it's hidden under an already existing stage.
You've been recognised, Alan, in a number of different ways. You received from the Queen the Order of the Bath.
Yeah, Companion of the Bath.
Yeah, which is not like go and have a bath, is it? No. So go on, what was that, and where did you receive it?
That was 3 or so years ago.
Yeah.
The Order of the Bath is one of the many orders of sort of gallantry, I guess. It's the top British English order, I think, and I am of the third class, a companion. A companion. It's what they call it. They said I'm a member of the shallow end of the bath.
Yes, but look, come on. When
shallow
you
end
say,
of the bath.
when
That's
you
what they call
say
it.
You're very understated. I mean, when you say the companion, I mean, there's only two others, and the other two is the Queen and Prince Charles, and then it's you.
No. It's not quite like that.
Yeah.
It's not quite like that. Anyway. So it was a great day. It was great because I think it was a recognition as much for me of what my family had put up with over the years, and they were all able to be there. And it was Her Majesty giving the honours that day.
Yeah.
And I must say, I also had the privilege to work and fly with His Royal Highness Prince Andrew, and he very kindly, although he wasn't able to be there on that day, he very kindly allowed 3 naval aviators who were being honoured on the same day to use his apartments and put champagne on for us, and, which was really fantastic of him. And the royal family get a lot of stick in the press, and we were talking about the press earlier. They focus on specific things, and I recall when the Lord was working powerfully at St Andrews, David Pitches got an awful lot of stick in the press as well. So what we should take from this is that 90% of what you read in the press is to be dismissed, I'm afraid. It really is. Even if it's got pictures with it, it's probably a misrepresentation of what actually is going on.
Yeah.
And His Royal Highness Prince Andrew served his country in the Falkland Islands and served for many years in the armed forces, and gets an awful lot of flack in the press. Which he doesn't deserve. So that was a great day. It was a great day.
It was a great day.
And I've got a fantastic photo of my family there.
And you were honoured and acknowledged for,
And it was great that I was fortunate enough to have Her Majesty giving the stuff out. I've got a video, John.
Oh,
why don't you come round over
and
Christmas
have a look at
and have a look at it? It's only about an hour and a half. It's fantastic. And give you a sort of commentary. And all my friends are welcome to come and see that as well.
Did you have a nice chat with the Queen? Did you have a little?
Yeah. She made a comment along the lines of, I understand, she very sotto voce, I understand you're in intelligence. She said, you don't look very much like James Bond, do you? Which of course is true.
So you had a little moment with her.
Yeah, it was. It's a very special day. It's a special day. It's very exciting, and it was great. And I'm glad my family could share it because they deserve it more than me.
And the future, Alan, how do you see the future for you?
So.
Did you have to retire?
Well, yes. The situation when you get to flag rank is you keep on going as long as you want to and they want you to. So there's no age limit as such. So I got to the stage where I'd sort of run out of jobs and they couldn't see another obvious job for me to go to. Having been the Chief of Defence Intelligence, it was a great job which I enjoyed.
Yeah.
So it was mutually agreed that my service would end. And I think, to be honest, I was ready.
Yes.
And Sarah was ready. Yeah.
I've known you, Alan, for probably 19 years and aware of some of your roles over the years and some of the things that you've been involved in. You're a very understated gentleman. And
you wouldn't think that.
Very capable, very gifted, and humble with it. And it's been a joy to know you, and well done for all that you've done in your life, in your career in the Navy, and all that you're going to do in the future. It's been a joy to be in conversation with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Alan Richards.
Thank you.